Welcome to Social Commerce in Action. I'm your host, Daryl Wurzbacher. As you arrive, please introduce yourself in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. So over the last couple of years, I've seen a big evolution in technology and the way that companies go to market, the way that they implement tools, from customer referral programs, loyalty programs, to tools and features to help drive growth and sales productivity. Today, I'm excited to bring on a thought leader who I've worked with for many years, who has a true passion for innovation, and not only innovation, but also being able to drive the adoption within the field, within corporate, and really impact change. So I'm really excited to bring him on. He played a key role with Kyani in their global transformation and global expansion. And he was a key part of the acquisition of Amare late last year. Excited to bring on Troy. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Daryl. How are you?
Doing great. Really looking forward to our conversation because I think it's really relevant with AI, ChatGPT. Everyone's talking about this. So before we jump into some of the meat, give me a bit of your background. Share for the audience that doesn't necessarily know you. Give a bit of your background, kind of what brought you to this point, and then we can jump into some of the AI conversations.
Absolutely. So, I've been involved in IT and specifically data for probably 25 years. I mean, it's kind of my passion. Right out of school, I had the opportunity to jump into a direct sales company. It was a very early startup. And my first project was to sit down with the owner and their tech person and gather all the requirements about their compensation plan and build an engine that would support that. Now, I have such respect for you, Daryl, and your team because of the fact that that's not easy. And being able to do that across multiple compensation plans is even harder. So from that point, I've had multiple opportunities. I was with Melaleuca, I was with USANA Health Sciences, with Kyani, like you said, and now with Amare Global. But in addition to that, I also had an opportunity to jump outside the space and kind of look at other industries and other environments. So I was in the government environment. I was with one of the Department of Energy national laboratories here in Idaho Falls. In addition, I was with a mining company that was they did global mining manufacturing. So I've had not only the opportunity to play in many different areas of technology, application development and data and cybersecurity, but also look at it from a number of different lenses, not just the direct sales lens, but how are these technologies impacting multiple industries, and how can you take the use cases from one industry and apply it in another industry with the technology to really advance and accelerate the business activity in that industry.
And I love that. And I think that's been the key thing that I've seen with you as well is really trying to find the use cases that can really apply to the field. And I know we've talked about that in the past of like early AI in the industry and in ways that could apply. Where do you see it now? So, you see all the news now about AI, ChatGPT. I know you've seen kind of the evolution of it. Are we at an inflection point? Is it too early? What do you see and what do you advise companies to really be looking at now? What's the right timing?
I definitely think that we are at an inflection point. I think that up until this point, and this is something that I've seen from an experience, is that I think a lot of the machine learning has been done behind the scenes. It was still fairly technical. It was still fairly complex. AI in general is still very complex with deep learning and neural nets and everything that goes behind it. But I see the inflection point that we're getting to is that the tools are becoming much more user-friendly and they're becoming intuitive for the common user to use. And so you no longer have to understand the math and the technical capabilities behind it to be able to interact with them. So, some of our first experiments with artificial intelligence and machine learning had to do with predictions. We were trying to identify a number of things. We were looking at, with our customers, who was going to attrit and who was going to leave and how do we save them? We were also looking at it from the perspective of fraud. How do we catch fraud? With fraud constantly in a dynamic set of change, how do you identify that fraud as it's coming up? The other thing that we were looking at was, at early stages, can we identify new leaders that are up and coming that need the mentoring and the onboarding so that they don't get burned out too quickly, so they don't feel isolated? So those were some of the cases that we saw early on. But again, it was all behind the scenes. With the launch of ChatGPT and some of these new tools, Dolly and Jasper, it's now becoming much more commercialized and much more consumerized, where every single distributor that is in this industry now has the power at their fingertips to become augmented and to do things that they couldn't do before. And I think from the standpoint of duplication, what we're going to see in the next 5 years in the direct sales space is that the duplication that has been very difficult in the past is going to get much easier. And I think that leaders are going to be able to focus more on strategy, more on vision casting, more on those high level things that are going to drive the industry forward, and less on, okay, I have to sit down with this brand new distributor and train them in the way of sales, or train them how our team works, or get them up to speed with a set of messages that they can get out to their consumer, their prospects. And so I think that what it's going to do is it's really going to free up the time of our leaders to do what they do best in the strategic space. But it's also, we're going to see just such mass duplication across the industry that I don't think we can really fathom what that's going to look like in the next 5 years.
And maybe take that. That's a great starting point. Take that and like unpack that a bit. So when you talk about the duplication, like what does that mean? So is it like the sales, like how they sell to customers? Is it the training? Is it like, maybe unpack a couple of the scenarios you see and like kind of the use cases and how that would apply?
Sure. So, and these are just a couple of the things that I've played with recently with the Chat GPT, and this is just one tool out of a whole field of different tools. But one of the use cases that I've seen is, okay, one of the things that we've always struggled with is, how do you get a set of messages in the hands of these brand new distributors that they can now send out to their friends, family, or anybody that they meet on the street? The challenge is that it's been very difficult, because you have to go through this process of, all of the leaders sitting down, spending a couple of days crafting these messages, refining these messages, and then you have a set of messages. So now a new distributor comes on board and they have this message, and they're sending the same message to their mother, to their brother, to their friend, as they are to a complete stranger. Well, with ChatGPT and the ability to do prompt engineering, you can take those same messages and you can have the machine customize and personalize that to a specific prospect. So for instance, let's say that you have a base message. Well, you can feed that into ChatGPT, and then you can tell ChatGPT, hey, I want this message to be customized for a specific channel. I want it to go out through Facebook Messenger. And so what we see is that now the message starts to get emoticons in it and emojis, and the paragraph structure starts to change, and it becomes a little bit more flashy, because Facebook Messenger, the recipients in that media are expecting a different message than those in an email. So that initial message might have been perfect for an email, but now you've got something that's for Facebook Messenger. Then you can tell ChatGPT, I want to customize this message to a friend who I've been friends with for years, since college. This individual they love nutrition. They have children that are about these ages. Here's what some of their concerns are. And now what you see is that this same message starts to evolve, and it becomes much more personalized. And so what you've done now is that you've given a tool to a distributor to take a formatted message and customize it to the individual. It's the same message, it's the same content, but you're focusing it on the person who is receiving it, so that they're going to be much more receptive to it than just this template. That template might be all right for some complete stranger that you've just met. But if you're sending a message, a templated marketing message, to a family member or a longtime friend, they're going to see through it very quickly. Yeah. And they're going to say, this looks weird. Why am I getting this marketing message from this person that I've known forever? And so what it does is it does empower all of our distributors to do mass personalization. It also allows them to break the ice, maybe in an asynchronous way, utilizing one of these media challenges, whether it's WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or Kakao Talk or Line or WeChat, any of these different mediums, and be able to start the conversation in a very non-threatening way, where the message has been developed for them. It's personalized. It breaks the ice. It answers some of the questions. And then they can take that offline and follow up on the conversation. But that initial fear of how do I approach people, which every new distributor has, it goes away. So it reduces that barrier. And I think that use case is going to be amazing. Another one that I just was trying out last night was the ability to do onboarding. So up until this point, we've tried this where we have paths of different videos and quizzes and trainings, trying to get people into the business. Because again, it's scary as a new distributor. Every new distributor coming in, with the exception of a few of those that have been around the block for a while, and they've done this before. But for the most part, these people are jumping in from other careers that are not sales related. They're nurses, they are school teachers, they are real estate agents. I mean, there's just a huge amount of background, and you're throwing them into product sales, whether it's nutritional sales or it's skincare or whatever it is. You're throwing them into a new environment, and you want to onboard them. Well, with ChatGPT, you can actually do role play. So you can give the bot a little bit of background on who the company is, and then you can say, I want to do a role play that I'm going to practice my approach to somebody. You can also specify that this is who it is. And then what will happen is that you'll go back and forth with the bot, and you'll practice your technique. You'll practice, how do you present the product? How do you present the opportunity? And at one point, you might send them to a link. And then at the end, when you feel like, okay, now I'm kind of done with that prospecting conversation, you can ask it for feedback. And it will take the conversation that you just had, not just a generic feedback. It will take the conversation that you just had, and it will say, here's what we saw, or here's what I saw, and here's the feedback that I can get. So one of the things, for instance, in Amare Global, we have a program that is a 10% off, and it's a great leader. So our leaders, what they do is that they have a coded link to them that automatically applies the 10% off code, and they send that out to a lot of their prospects. So I was going through the conversation, talked a little bit about my personal experience with the product, talked a little bit about how it made me feel. And then I said, as the bot came back with a little bit of interest, I sent it my link. In my feedback, the feedback said, you did really well, but one of the things that we noticed was that you probably led with the link a little too early. You should have built a little bit more rapport, because by sending out that link, it came across a little bit too salesy. Now, for a brand new distributor to have this personalized feedback, in the past, what have they had to do? The leaders had to sit down with that individual and go through that role play, which sometimes is very, very unnatural. You get into a role playing situation, and I don't know if you're like me, but anytime I get into a role playing situation, you kind of sit there and you do it for like a minute, and then you're like, okay, what do I do? Well, with ChatGPT, there's really no judgment, because you're still talking to a machine. But in the end, you're still getting that very valid feedback, and you can treat that machine just like as it was a friend or a colleague that you were communicating back and forth with via text or Facebook Messenger, and get that. I mean, internally, you kind of feel like, okay, I'm on the spot now. This is not just practice. I'm actually doing this because and in the end, I'm not getting judged by another person. I'm getting personalized feedback, which is what I need. And I can see some great use cases in terms of, again, allowing those leaders to be freed up to do the strategic thinking and offload that duplication effort of onboarding and removing those barriers to entry, so that every single distributor that comes in the door is empowered with the tools to be successful. And the leader doesn't have to do that on a one-to-one basis. It can be done in mass. So if you think, if a leader can do 5 of those a week or 5 of those a month, how much more could be done if the computer were doing that? I mean, if the leaders are out there using their personal relationships to bring in 50 or 100 individuals, and every single one of them is getting this personalized training and messaging, you can just imagine the way that these organizations could explode overnight. But it comes down to just having that augmented capability of AI underlying the tools that they're utilizing.
So how do you see? I mean, that's a great use case. I mean, it's great. That totally makes sense. Now, how do you see companies like using it now, right? So like a lot of that stuff is, like, do you see the leaders going to ChatGPT? How do you see it like turning to like practical use or practical usage now, or how do you see that?
So I think that over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to start to see these AI capabilities built into the tools that we use. So a lot of the companies, they have their prospecting tools, they have their back offices. I think that we're going to start to see some of these tools being built in. But that doesn't mean that the leaders have to stop and wait for those. They can start right now. The reality is that OpenAI has opened up ChatGPT, at least with the 3.5 version, to almost everybody. I mean, the uptick in terms of adoption of this has been amazing. Yeah. So one of the recommendations is you could get your team together, everybody have a laptop or their iPad, and you could walk through a scenario up on the board and then have them practice. You could give them some basic prompts and say, okay, let's try this out. And then let's spend the next half hour or an hour tweaking this to be personalized for you. So let's say a leader gets up and says, okay, here's the onboarding scenario that we're going to look at. Maybe we walk through that as a group. Okay, now each individual, I want you to think of a specific person that is in your warm list. What are their interests? What's their background? How do you now craft a prompt and put it in there and then practice? So now what you have is you have this whole audience that is not just repeating what was up on the board, what the leader showed them. They've now taken this and personalized it to something that maybe they can leave that meeting and go do. And so the idea is that they can use this tool today to go out and start to build their teams. They don't have to wait for the AI to be built into the tools that they use. And I think that that's kind of exciting. I don't know how many people are actually doing that, but I think that it will start to catch on. I think that some of the innovative leaders are starting to see these areas of potential, and the lights are going off in their head, and they're going, yeah, you know what? I can do this. I've got, especially those who have kind of a younger team that is hungry for technology. I think some of those leaders are going to start seeing that, and they're going to go, you know what? We can try this. Let's see what this looks like. Let's be trailblazers in this, because if it's true that we can multiply our efforts, they're the ones that are going to excel. I mean, they're going to be the huge organizations of the coming years. And so I would say, from a guideline standpoint, if you've got that inclination, get in and try it. Because I don't think it's definitely not going to go away. And if you can be ahead of the curve, or the curve, and you can start to leverage this with your team, you're going to have such a heads up and be so far ahead of everybody else that's waiting for it to be built into the tools.
And with that, I mean, if you think about like right now, a big part of, you mentioned prompt engineering, like that is a big part of like how prompts are put in and kind of the context that's provided. Do you see that being something where like corporate, at least at this point, should be providing some level of like it's like whatever you feed in is the key aspect of it. So it's almost like, do you see standardized prompts from corporate in this interim state where it's like, here's product prompts, here's like, how do you see that? I guess, how do you turn that into even more information?
It could be that corporate is designing and developing those. I think it's going to be a combination between the field leaders and corporate, because one of the things that you see with ChatGPT and the personalization is that corporate normally has a very marketing focused message. It's very proper. The grammar is, it's all good. And I'm not saying that ChatGPT will produce things that don't have good grammar, because they will, but the style is different. Yeah. And so you can either, the field leaders know who their prospects are. They know who their teams are. They can go out and start creating those messages and trainings today. Corporate, I believe, probably should partner with some of those leading edge leaders to say, where are you having success? How do we now scale this to an enterprise level? How do we now teach the entire field how to use this, knowing that your demographics of every team are going to be so different? You've got some teams that are, they're the millennials, they're Generation Z. They've grown up with technology. This is just going to become second nature to them. Then you've got other teams that are probably more the Generation X or the baby boomers. it's gonna be a little bit harder for them to get in. I think that they'll probably get in and they'll start to love it, but just the entry point is going to be a little bit different. The initial message, I believe, is going to be a little bit different as well. So I think that it will be a combination of the field leadership along with corporate trying to scramble around and get some prompts in place that can start being utilized by the field. But the field is really where it's going to grow organically. And you're going to see the tools take that and personalize it. And you might have an individual that feeds a prompt in, gets out a prompt, refines that prompt, and then saves that to the side, and that becomes their seed every time instead of using what corporate gave them. So that's kind of the evolution of this, is that it doesn't have to be a single seed from corporate that then germinates throughout the field. It can be personalized and it can be for a specific individual.
Totally makes sense. And now when you think about like adoption of this versus other technology you've seen, like how do you see this differently? Like is this earlier that it's more scary? Like do you see this different than other adoption activities you've done in the past? Or is it kind of the same as you've seen in the past, right? What's your thoughts on adoption and life cycle?
I think that this technology has a potential of expanding much more quickly than some of the other technologies. So I talked about, the machine learning and the AI that we were just doing, let's say 5-7 years ago. Much of it was very IT heavy. So you had a use case, you took it to IT. IT would develop the requirements. They would go out and acquire the software to do the building, or they would build it in Python or R or one of the code platforms, and then they would deliver you a result. Now that result would start to evolve and it would start to learn, but you still had to have the core built. With the consumer nature of this, especially with ChatGPT and OpenAI, they've opened it up to everybody, and Bing and Google has Bard. So it's already out in the consumer environment. You don't have to wait for IT to build it. You don't have to wait for IT to go through a 6 to 12 month project life cycle to get something up and running. Yeah. I think that that's going to make the adoption of this much more rapid than some of the technology that we've seen in the past. I think that it's closer to what we saw with the iPhones and the apps and the proliferation of that. You saw business users seeing the potential of the use cases and start to adopt them, and not have to be encumbered by IT. Now, I come from IT. I love IT. That's my forte. But I also understand that you only have so many resources with IT. And so oftentimes when the business comes to IT, they get put on a backlog. They are told that they need to wait 6 to 12 months. And it just, that is how it is. Yeah. With this new technology, you don't necessarily have to wait. You can do it today. Leaders could go out tonight and start training their teams and doing these role plays and these practice sessions with the tools that are out on the internet, and they're good. I mean, so I see this concept of proliferation of this technology and the dissemination of this technology being so fast because of the accessibility of the underlying tools that are already out there.
Yeah, totally. And that's exactly what I'm seeing too. And like, that's even the most recent things around building agents that are kind of provide that context for the input. So then you can kind of pre-build agents for specific products, specific initiatives, needs, things like that. Do you see companies like expediting that kind of development? I mean, even with ChatGPT, you can have it write code, you can have it write some of that stuff for you. Do you see that something where companies should be focusing on that as well? And do you think that's going to be part of that rapid adoption lifecycle? What's your thoughts there?
I definitely think that IT groups, they're going to be disrupted by this. It's going to be a good disruption, but I think that they're going to start to leverage these tools to build faster, to increase their feature deployment, to increase their code quality, to explain better what their code is doing, and potentially have better documentation and comments around it. I think it's going to make IT organizations much more effective and efficient. And so, yeah, they're going to be able to speed up their progress as well. Now, going back to, these generations and these groups, I think the tools that build the prompts for you, I think those are going to come probably 6 to 12 months down the road. I think your early adopters are going to be those who understand how to do prompt engineering, and it just comes naturally. They're going to jump into these open tools and they're just going to start building their own prompts and they're going to play with it. I think that, maybe Gen X, and I'm Gen X, but we are getting a little older, and the baby movers, I think that they're going to want a little bit more. They're going to want more guardrails. They're going to want interfaces that will build the prompts for them. And it's nothing against them, but I think it's just the mindset. And so I think what's going to happen is you're going to lead with the younger demographics because of the fact that they're willing to experiment. And then as those experiments prove out successful, you're going to see interfaces built on top of those that are going to be that are going to guide people into the answers. So instead of having somebody say, go in and type, I want to do a role play. Here's what the scenario is. What you're going to do is you're going to see a tool that's going to come up and say, fill out this set of fields that specify who it is you're talking to and what the scenario is, and push this button, and we're going to start the conversation. And it's going to be much easier for them to consume. So even though it's easy to consume today, it's still experimental. As it matures, it's going to become a little bit more defined and probably a little bit more intuitive for all distributors and all people.
Now you mentioned before that you've done some work on AI in the last 6-7 years, but it's more back end. Do you see like I guess the results from that and how that worked out versus now? Is the evolutions like where the use cases back then didn't work well or didn't necessarily work well, but now they would because of more technology? How do you see that, or was it? Yeah, how did you see that?
I think that there's going to be there's a process of refinement, and I think it's going to be the same with this technology as it was before. It really depends on the quality of your inputs of data. And so with all of the models that we did, fraud management, predictive attrition, predictive sales, identifying who the future leaders were, it was all based on how clean and how viable is the data that you're feeding to it. I think with ChatGPT, they've fed it a lot of data, but you can see use cases that it still has this concept of hallucinations, AI hallucinations. What that means is that the tool is it's so excited about getting you an answer that it will always get you an answer. That answer might not be 100% correct, but it doesn't care because its goal is to get you an answer. And so over time, we're going to see the model get more and more refined. And this is also what is scaring some of the people in the industry, is trying to figure out at what pace should we be developing the technology that's underlying it, and what's the safety mechanism. How do we maintain privacy? How do we ensure that there is not bias in the outputs? So as this tool is eager to get you a result, is there bias in that result? Is it going to lead you to a bad scenario just because you've got an answer? And so all of those things, the Elon Musk and some of the other industry leaders are saying, okay, even though we have the technical capability to expand this by a factor of 10, 100, a billion, whatever it is, in the next year, should we? Or should we take a step back and make sure that the results that are being delivered are of good quality, that they're leading people to right decisions and not just generating content, even though that content is getting incredibly advanced very, very quickly and has some huge capabilities and huge potential.
That's great insights, and that's exactly what I'm seeing as well. Is how do you correct the hallucinations with other agents checking the answers, and it's progressing very fast. So we're almost out of time. Any parting thoughts? Any parting advice for people that are watching this in terms of getting ahead of the curve?
I mean, I would say that anyone that is watching this, whether you're a leader in an organization or you're an IT leader or an IT practitioner, I would say get in and try it. One of the things that yesterday we had a conversation on our company town hall where they opened up a Slack channel and they said, anybody that wants to join, let's just have some conversations around AI. Let's talk about how you're using it. What are the potentials? And it's those conversations, getting those conversations started. That's the critical thing. But I think it needs to not only be at the corporate level. I think that the field needs to be having those conversations as well, because I think that they're going to be as much a driver of this new technology as corporate is. And so it definitely needs to be a partnership. I think all companies need to be closely engaged with their field trying to figure out how do we navigate this new landscape and how do we make sure that it's an enabler and not a detractor? Because that's what you don't want, is you don't want it to detract your field and your sales force. You want it to enable that sales force so that they can be highly successful.
Love the answer, and great conversation, Troy. I appreciate you sharing what you've been focused on, and I'll definitely want to have you back at some point as this progresses and as the industry evolves. But definitely appreciate your time today, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Sounds great. Thanks, Daryl.
Thanks, Troy.